A Concise History of Japan. Page 10, first chapter. The birth of the Yamato state, 14,500 BC to 710 AD. Japan's environment proved much more than simply a sculptor of Japanese civilization, where wind and rain painstakingly chiseled over the centuries the intricate contours of Japanese life. Rather, the environment was a product of Japanese civilization. Early inhabitants of the Japanese islands from the Yayoi archaeological phase, 300 BC till 300 AD, onward carved, sliced, burnt, and hoed their subsistence needs and cultural sensibilities into the alluvial plains, forests, mountainous spine, and base of the archipelago, transforming it, like some colossal bonsai tree, into a material manifestation of their needs and desires. This is the most profound disjuncture between the Yomon archaeological phase, 14,500 BC to 300 AD, and the Yayoi. The introduction of East Asian cultures and its transformative effect on the archipelago. This chapter explores the emergence of the earliest Japanese state and how state development was intimately connected to environmental transformation. Early foragers and settlers. The Pleistocene epoch, about 2.6 million to 11,700 years before present, witnessed the first wave of early hominid, non-human animal, and incidental plant migrations across Eurasia and onto the Japanese archipelago. Japan was not an archipelago at the time, however. Rather, it was connected to the continent at both the southern and northern sections by coastal lowlands that formed a terrestrial crescent, with the Sea of Japan serving as what must have been an impressive inland sea. Whether modern hominids came from Africa and displaced earlier hominids or the earlier arrivals evolved into modern hominids is still debated. But by 100,000 years before present, many Paleolithic foragers roamed Eurasia, and some of them wandered onto this terrestrial crescent in pursuit of game and other foraging opportunities. The 1931 discovery of a left pelvic bone first suggested Paleolithic habitation of the terrestrial crescent, but air raids destroyed the bone during the Pacific War between 1937 and 45, and the bone discoverer was only vindicated with the later unearthing of other Paleolithic remains throughout Japan. These Paleolithic and later Mesolithic hunters tracked and killed large game, including Paleoxodon elephants and giant deer. They and their prey watched, across generation upon generation, Japan's geographic character transform as fluctuating climates and ocean levels allowed the continent to claim the crescent and then lose it around 12,000 years before present. When oceans poured into coastal lowlands and created a string of islands. As for the early foragers, linguists traced three distinct language groups among these humans, ones that indicate routes of migration: Ural Altaic, namely Japanese, Korean, Northeast Asian, and Turkic languages; Chinese, Tibet, and Burman languages; and the Austroasiatic, Vietnamese, Khmer, and several minority languages in China. With the final stages of the Pleistocene, Japan's early foragers had overhunted most of the archipelago, giant mammals, now geographically confined with hungry hominids in the so-called Pleistocene extinction. Hominid foragers, whatever languages they spoke, were not the only hunting tribes that wandered onto this crescent. Wolves arrived there too. Siberian wolf skulls have been discovered throughout Japan. In the late Pleistocene, these large wolves hunted and foraged in the coniferous forests of northern Honshu, where they brought down large game such as steppe bison. These bison were big, with horns spanning some 1 meter across their bony skulls, but the Siberian wolf was big too. It loitered opportunistically among the herds, searching for injured stragglers. We can surmise that hominids were not the only hunters pushing the Pleistocene extinction, or at least picking up the pieces from it. As the archipelago separated from the continent, about 12,000 years before present, coniferous forests yielded to the uh, deciduous growth, devouring precious devouring precious grasslands for large bison and their hungry pursuers. This climate shift and the accompanying changes in forest composition also contributed to the Pleistocene extinction. Now isolated with its large game extinct, the Siberian wolf dwarfed into the smaller Japanese wolf that would become extinct in the early 20th century. This period also witnessed the emergence of Japan's common species such as Japanese deer, wild boar, and a variety of other smaller animals. At this juncture, Japan's tumultuous geography, its transformation from a terrestrial crescent to an archipelago, did drive history. In the case of modern hominid foragers, their settlements, patterns, dwelling arrangements, and hunting circuits. For the wolf, the very shape and size of its skull, but later human settlers, particularly across the Aoi face, proved better at transforming their island home to suit their subsistence and cultural needs. About 12,700 years before present, while the terrestrial crescent transformed into an archipelago, foragers discovered, or were introduced to, the verdict is still out among uh, archaeologists. They were introduced to a monumental technological breakthrough, namely pottery. The oldest fragments come from the Fukui cave in northwest Kyushu, an area that served as a conduit for exchange with the continent. Vexingly, nothing this early has been unearthed in China or anywhere else for that matter. Archaeologists refer to these people as Yomon, which stands for court pattern, because the pottery is often adorned with elaborate court markings imprinted around the rim and elsewhere on the jars. This technological advance allowed these foragers to become more sedentary, as they could now prepare formerly inedible vegetables and shellfish, as well as boil seawater to produce salt for consumption and trade. Cultigens became a feature of later human life, but simple agriculture proved more limited than other Neolithic groups. The first human man, Japan's Adam, discovered in 1949 buried in a flex position at the Hirashiki Shell Mound, stood 163 centimeters tall, which is about 3 centimeters taller than average, with women being considerably shorter. Unused wisdom teeth and other evidence suggest a short life expectancy at some 24 years for women and perhaps a decade longer for men. Over the centuries, the styles of Yamon pottery changed, but it remained ornate with swirling patterns and imprints, elaborate handles, and other forms of decoration, and delicate shapes with impractically narrow bottoms. The relatively pointy bottoms would have been great for nomadic life, holding in jars upright in loose soil or sand, but impractical for life in a hardened floor home. Nonetheless, the increasing sophistication of the pottery hints at ritualistic purposes and regular home use, offering a possible first glimpse into the religious life of the archipelago's earliest settlers. Yomon hunters developed bows which hurled deadly projectiles at much higher velocities than earlier spears. Wolfish dogs that probably migrated onto the terrestrial crescent with earlier Paleoli- Pale- Paleolithic foragers hunted alongside the Yomon for smaller game. Skeletal remains of dogs from the Natsushima shell mounds in Kanagawa Prefecture date to 9,500 years before present. Archaeologists have uncovered elaborate systems of pit traps, no doubt used to trap and impale boar and other game. Yomon also subsisted on fruits and nuts, bulbs and starchy tubers, shellfish such as mollusks, clams and oysters, fish such as sea bream, and other food sources as well. Bone harpoon heads and fish hooks from the Numasi shell middens suggest that they became reasonably skilled fishers. But all this was not good enough. Skeletal remains demonstrate that the Yomon lived in a nearly constant state of malnutrition on the cusp of reproductive instability. A diet of high-calorie nuts meant that the teeth of most rotted painfully from their heads. Larger Yomon settlements situated their houses in a circular pattern with a central communal space for burials, food storage, and ceremonial functions. Better homes with inner posts supporting pitched roofs allowed Yomon to accumulate more possessions, including dogu or earthenware figurines. Often figurines depicted buxom women, suggesting that their ritual purpose was aimed at reproduction and safe childbirths. Phallic items point to fertility rituals. Snakehead motifs offer tantalizing evidence of snake-related ceremonies, perhaps conducted by village shamans. Skeletal remains with missing adult teeth indicate forms of ritualized teeth pulling, probably as a form of coming-of-age ritual. Some of the larger pottery jars, called placenta pots, contained placental remains and even the remains of infants, demonstrating elaborate forms of burial and ceremony. As sophisticated as Yamon life became, these souls always survived on the edge, and their society proved ill prepared for environmental changes and disappearing game. Some 4,500 years before present, a drop in global temperatures sparked a herbaceous cascade that led to decline in mammal populations and nut orchards, and Yomon people soon found themselves vulnerable to food shortages and famine. With deer and boar harder to find, even with the keen noses of trusted hunting dogs, Yomon foragers took to killing smaller game, and many inland settlements relocated to coastal areas to improve foraging and fishing. Some insist that Japan's 260,000 inhabitants in 4,500 years before present might have declined to 160,000 over the course of the next millennium. Yamon people had reached the limits of conforming to the changing nature of their home.